Welcome to The Bridge, from Surviving to Thriving in Medical School, a medical student podcast on success and belonging at UCSF. This series explores how medical students succeed and thrive in medical school through important relationships, academic support, well-being, and career exploration. I am your host, Nikai Corral, a second-year resident at UCSF. Today's episode examines how students can manage stress and expand their awareness of their emotions. I would like to introduce two special guests in this episode. Sapna Ramappa is a third-year medical student in the UCSF School of Medicine, and Dr. Alice Hua is a clinical psychologist and assistant director of the UCSF Medical Student Wellbeing Program. Sapna and Alice, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
So Alice, starting with you, what is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you?
Thanks, Nikai. One thing I want to share is I'm the child of Chinese immigrants and an immigrant myself. Before I came to the US, I lived in Australia and Hong Kong. And because I lived in different countries as a child, I often felt like I lived between worlds, which also captures how I feel about my identity as an Asian American. Moving through different cultural spaces meant paying attention to how people express themselves and connect, and I think these experiences are part of why I'm a psychologist today.
And thinking about the School of Medicine in particular, what is your role and why does it give you joy?
Well, as a clinical psychologist, I work with people to understand themselves more deeply, learn more about their strengths, and enhance any healthy behaviors that might work well for them. And to be totally honest, it never gets old witnessing people feel hopeful again. And I love watching students strengthen their relationship with themselves, which also helps strengthen their relationships with others.
And Sapna, to you, what is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you?
I actually ran a podcast in college and a few years after college all around mental health in the diaspora, South Asian diaspora. So I feel kind of at ease, and it's like a fun throwback to be next to a mic setup again.
That's so cool. Is your podcast available to be listened to in the interwebs?
Yes, absolutely. It's still up online. I just sound a lot younger, but it's still available. It's called Loudmouth Ledkeys. We talk about mental health and other stigmatized topics traditionally in the South Asian diaspora. And it was a great time when I was recording those.
Now that you're in medical school, what is a role in the School of Medicine that gives you joy?
I feel very, very grateful and very privileged to be super involved on campus, and that has allowed me to explore many spaces that bring me a lot of joy. I think one that particularly brings a lot of joy is our South Asian Medical Student Association. It's shortened to SAMOSA, which I love that name. But one of my really good friends in the class, who's also my roommate, we helped revamp the SAMOSA chapter our first year. And it's been a great opportunity to bring people together, do fun cultural events with people who share our identity, and also introduce parts of our culture to other classmates as well. So we've done a bunch of fun movie nights and lots of food, dinners and snacks, and also cultural events as well, which has been really fun and is very, very joyful.
That's awesome. Those community building things in the context of medical school are so important, especially given the exceptional levels of stress. Can you share an experience or a time where you felt particularly stressed in medical school?
Absolutely. I actually just started my clinical rotations 2 months ago and just finished my first rotation and first shelf exam, which comes with its own sets of stressors. But just a week and a half ago or so, I was kind of in the thick of studying for my first shelf exam. And for anyone who's taken those exams, they're kind of demoralizing sometimes. The questions are very difficult, and sometimes you're in the clinic all day seeing patients, you feel like you have a hang of it, and then you come home and you're studying and prepping for these exams, and they feel like completely out of your comfort zone. And so I was experiencing that for the first time, along with just trying to get a hang of what it's like to take care of patients. And so just 2 weeks ago, I had this moment on a Friday where I was on a relatively quiet inpatient unit and was expecting to get out at 3 or 4 p.m., which is what the residents and attendings on the team said, and my other friends who had done that rotation as well. And so I had prepped, okay, I'm going to finish my clinical day. I'm going to come home. I'll take a practice shelf exam, and then I'll go to my best friend's birthday party that night, and kind of had everything all set out because that just happens to be the type of person that I am. It's just kind of over planning. And so I had my day all planned out. And when I got there, it was very clear early on that it was going to be a longer day, and had a relatively challenging clinical scenario that ended up taking all day. And so it was a great learning opportunity, but I had this thought in the back of my head, like, oh no, I have to go home. I have to take this practice exam. I had to go to my friend's birthday. And that was difficult because I found myself detaching from the clinical moment and the learning moment at hand. But at the end of the day, it was all okay. I finished later than intended and decided to just go to my best friend's party and just meet her friends and have a nice, relaxed night. And there's always more studying that can be done. So I ended up saving that for later. And it all worked out okay.
In medical school, it is a constant cycle of stress and de-stress and eustress in many ways. When you are conceptualizing your history in medical school, how do you recognize the early signs of stress in yourself? And what do you do about it?
For better or for worse, I'm someone who has a lot of physical manifestations of stress, sometimes even before I realize it. Since I was very young, I'd get headaches, or I'd have trouble sleeping, or I'd feel very overwhelmed, just like, oh my gosh, there's so many things on my to-do list, which for a medical student is often the case, but it just feels like those to-do lists are larger than life. And so having those physical manifestations of stress allows me to more easily tell when I'm stressed. And it's a helpful alarm in my head to be like, okay, something's not right. And it allows me to take a second to pause and think about what needs to be done for me to manage those stress levels. But I'd say those are the early signs for me.
So Alex, thinking about the medical student environment, what is perfectionism versus healthy striving, and how can it contribute to stress?
So perfectionism is a pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that's generally characterized by a stronger focus on avoiding failure than approaching a goal, and often making the assumption that sometimes your mistakes reflect on your whole being. And we all learn messages about what it means to be successful from our upbringing and from systemic oppression. And the learned belief that there is somehow one right way to be can perpetuate more stress on top of the existing stress we experience when we're approaching different tasks or challenges. So one example of perfectionism might be, I should always answer the attending's questions correctly, or I should never show when I'm sad. Trying to behave within these rigid expectations can exacerbate stress because doing so is not really feasible or sustainable. And trying to behave within these expectations can reinforce the myth of achieving perfection, which, spoiler alert, doesn't actually exist. On the other hand, healthy striving involves focusing on growth, recognizing mistakes as inherent to the learning process, and finding some reward in approaching different challenges. We can increase healthy striving by focusing on our values or ways of living that are important to us. So, for example, instead of, I should always answer each question correctly on this exam, you might think to yourself, I care about the quality of my work, and I want to demonstrate what I've learned. Instead of, I should get exactly 8 hours of sleep and work out every day, you might think to yourself, I want to prioritize my health and well-being. So identifying values helps us name our priorities and allows for more than one way to act in alignment with those values.
I really appreciate that reflection, especially as we think about the roles that the medical school environment itself creates that perfectionist mentality. From your angle, where does that perfectionism come from, and how exactly is that learned?
So when we think about broader messages about what it means to be successful, we all grow up with certain ideas of what kind of job to have, what kind of relationship to have, maybe things in terms of appearance or ways to express ourselves. And different systems of oppression can kind of reduce us to certain standards or single dimensions. And learning that there's only one right way to be can end up perpetuating some of these perfectionistic beliefs or behaviors.
And somebody you had previously before mentioned these physical manifestations of stress that you feel. Once you begin to feel some of these things, especially in the context of medical school, what are some strategies or techniques that you use to manage said stress effectively?
I think over the years now of medical school and also in my undergraduate time, my gap years, it's definitely been an ongoing journey of learning what stress techniques work best for me. And I realize that these will change as I gain more responsibilities and different roles. So kind of with the caveat that a lot of these goals are aspirational and some I do at better times than others. I think given those physical manifestations of stress, like I mentioned, a lot of my strategies revolve around that. I try to do as much yoga as possible, as many long walks as I can get in Golden Gate Park, trying to get sleep as much as I can when it's possible. And that definitely helps with some of those headaches that I get. Something else that I was taught a few years ago is box breathing or triangle breathing, where you breathe in for 3, you hold it for 4, and you go out for 5. And I think that has helped me in those kind of more acute moments of stress. And I found myself intuitively doing that when I'm on a stressful clinical day or right before a stressful exam. And I found that that helps me a lot too. So those are the more mind-body stress relief tactics I've learned over the years. I think generally I'm a big fan of just calling up my friends and my family in times of stress, mentors as well. And that has also just given me a lot of peace on hard days. And I definitely call to my parents anytime I've had a difficult day in clinic, and they've been super helpful. I think in terms of managing my environment, cleaning helps. I've found that sometimes my room reflects my mental state. And so being able to take a few minutes just to declutter my space has helped me out a bunch. And environmentally, I think also just spending as little time on my phone as possible, just to help against the natural energy to go on my phone and doom scroll. I think that trying to stay away from my phone and just having several hours without technology has been really helpful as well.
So pivoting a little bit to your perspective on what we can actually do to combat some of this perfectionism, what do you conceptualize at what mindfulness is, and why does it matter for managing stress?
One of my favorite questions ever and things to talk about. So mindfulness is a skill which originated from Buddhist teachings and refers to how we redirect our attention to the present. And from research, we have learned that mindfulness improves self-compassion, cognitive flexibility, relationship satisfaction, and also reduces stress, anxiety, depression, and somatic distress. In general, what we learn physiologically, mindfulness practices tend to slow the breath, which promotes greater parasympathetic activity that leads to more relaxation and calmness. So mindfulness on a psychological level also helps us practice more awareness, and we get to experience just a bit more agency by honing our observation.
So when we think about mindfulness in particular, we have open versus singular focus, using the senses, participating in the moment, being an observer. From your angle and how you speak to students about this, how can folks practice mindfulness in their own way?
I'm very much of the mindset of do whatever works. So we might not all be Buddhist monks who have spent a lot of years sitting in a temple and practicing mindfulness all the time, but there can be small ways we can practice attending to the present. So one way is to really stay focused on one thing at a time. A really common way I introduce to students is really closing your eyes and focusing on the breath. As much as possible, even focusing on the singular point on your nose where the breath goes in and out so that you're focusing on the pacing of your breathing. You can also practice mindfulness with a more open focus by noticing thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations in the present moment without judgment and without trying to change them. So you become a bit more of an observer to your internal world. For example, I notice the thought that ... I'm feeling excited, or I feel that my heart is racing. You can also practice mindfulness by using the senses that are accessible to you. So the next time you sit on a bench or walk around at Golden Gate Park, consider paying attention to the sights like the density of leaves on a tree branch, the smells like the fresh air or smells from a nearby food truck, the feel of the breeze on your face, the sounds that you hear, and whatever else is happening in the moment. Finally, you can also practice mindfulness by participating in the moment fully. So we might do this when we're singing very loudly to ourselves to the Wicked soundtrack, or even when you're taking a test and you notice you're just really in the zone and locked into each question, or just allowing ourselves to feel our emotions fully and crying during a sad movie.
You've done a really great job of identifying what exactly is involved in mindfulness. When you think about the benefits of mindfulness, of emotions and emotional awareness, what comes to mind?
This is my other favorite topic to talk about all the time. First, I want to acknowledge that not all emotions are pleasant, and that's why we as a human species tend to avoid the unpleasant ones. And second, I want to acknowledge that we all grow up valuing certain emotions over others. So, for example, it might have been more acceptable growing up to express happiness more so than sadness or anger. And at least from the standpoint of emotion research, or just the function of emotions, there's no such thing as a good or bad emotion. So emotions provide us with information that helps us communicate, prepare us for actions, and make decisions. And so when it comes to mindfulness of emotion, we can do so by using identification, non-judgmental noticing, and practicing validation. So a concrete example might be if I haven't spent time with my friends in a while, I might notice feeling lonely or sad. I might remind myself to acknowledge, okay, in this moment, I'm feeling lonely or sad. So I'm practicing identification and non-judgmental noticing by not shaming myself for experiencing these emotions. I can practice emotional validation by saying, it makes sense I feel lonely or sad because I miss connection with my favorite people. And because I allowed myself to notice the emotion as it arose without judgment and also with some validation, this helped me clarify an underlying value or need, which is connection, and would probably prompt me to reach out to a friend via text and set up plans to eat noodle soup together for next week. If I'm less mindful, I might not know why I'm feeling discomfort in the moment, which can lead to feelings of confusion or frustration. If I'm less mindful, I might also judge myself for feeling sad, which frankly would only make myself feel worse. So not knowing how I feel or noticing feelings with judgment might even prevent me from seeking connection because I'm not acknowledging what my emotions are telling me in terms of my values or needs. I also acknowledge we don't always have the greatest of practice naming different emotions. So if this is less familiar, you can just start with naming bodily sensations like I notice tension in my shoulders or I notice a pit in my stomach. And you can use the same approach of identification, non-judgmental noticing, and practicing validation to better understand your needs in the moment. So to summarize all of that, mindfulness helps us improve understanding of our needs, values, or goals, and also helps us to communicate to others, which can strengthen relationships.
And Alice, one thing that certainly has been a topic that we've all been reflecting upon recently with different political instability, what do you recommend for students navigating these broader societal and sociopolitical stressors?
Thank you for this question, Nakai. Even though what I shared about navigating general stress can be applicable here, I also want to recognize the moment we're in, navigating heightened uncertainty and greater threats to safety, well-being, civil rights, education, public health, among so many things. And honestly, whatever else is happening when this podcast is released, all these threats can heighten distress in a way that can be traumatizing or re-traumatizing, since some of these threats are not new, although certainly amplified. And as a mental health provider, and dare I say a human being also living through this too, I'm humbled by the enormity of the moment and also truly how limited I am in predicting what's next. I think I can't say anything that will fundamentally change this moment. I can share some reflections that I think will continue to be true as we navigate all of this together. I want to say that if you notice heightened distress, this makes sense because of what you value and what you're trying to protect. Noticing fear might signal the importance of safety and stability. Noticing sadness or grief might signal values of care and compassion. Noticing anger might signal the importance of respect and dignity for all people. And maybe even noticing gratitude might signal how connection through community is just so invaluable. Again, I'm reiterating how honoring where our feelings come from by identifying values can also provide a roadmap for values-aligned action. So, for example, if I center values of care and compassion, I can do my best to protect my loved ones, provide emotionally safe support to others, choose activities that help me feel nourished to protect my capacity for compassion for the long haul, and be really intentional about organizations I support by recognizing how organizations impact communities. If I want to center values of respect and dignity, I can practice those values in my relationships, communicate support for policies that center people's autonomy, share helpful resources and information to help people protect each other, and so on. There's no singular answer, and I think we can ask ourselves, how did we honor our values today to help us be intentional about our choices? Another reflection I can offer is the importance of acknowledging seemingly opposing truths. This often comes down to recognizing the many, many things that are not within our direct control, and also certain things that are within our direct control, all of which exist at the same time. So on the one hand, our capacity to be aware of so much suffering and violence will always be greater than what we can directly do or control. And at the very same time, what we choose to do within our control is important, like how we choose to show up for each other. And our collective impact from choices within our control will continue to be important, like how we collectively make waves together. And finally, I want to acknowledge how collective impact is not just limited to this moment. Impact is cumulative across time and context, which can be helpful for identifying our individual and collective strengths. We can ask ourselves, what are the skills or talents that I can bring that help me act in alignment with my values? We can also ask ourselves, how can we draw from historical examples of strength and wisdom, or from people we respect and admire? Drawing on our individual strengths and from strength from community before us and from our current community can be another way to navigate times like these, especially when cultivating hope is really intentional and feels so important. I know I'm personally grateful for the many healers, writers, scholars, activists, including Black, Indigenous, other people of color, disabled, LGBTQIA+ folks, women, working class folks, and so many more, who have existed or exist at multiple intersections of oppression. So I know I draw strength from my immediate community right now in my present, and from the people who have been at the forefront of values-aligned action in service of upholding community, respect, and dignity for all people.
Somebody, you mentioned your parents before and how they are such a big support system for you, especially when you're dealing with stress in medical school. What are some other of your support systems that you tap into when you're looking to stay as emotionally healthy as possible during this time?
My parents are really helpful. My community, both inside medical school and out, has been just so instrumental in helping me balance the many roles that we carry as a medical student and also the roles that we carry outside of that. I think in particular, my friends who are not in medical school have been really helpful. I think given that my med school friends know what I'm going through day in, day out, they're, of course, a very helpful resource to rant about different things that happen during the day or talk about study strategies and things like that. But it's really been my family and friends and loved ones outside of medical school that remind me that I am a full person outside of all of these cool things that we do on the clinical day. They're able to remind me of my passions and my hobbies and the things that make me me outside of medical school, and that I've found is very grounding. And kind of on the topic of community, there's something I think about a lot is this whole floating duck syndrome, of this idea that if you look at a duck on a pond, you see them just floating around and it looks effortless, but underneath the water, everyone's kind of flapping and paddling. And I found that analogy really helpful in medical school, where all of us have this sort of armor up and everyone seems pretty invincible and confident. And I found that really tapping into community and talking to people and breaking past a little bit of that small talk really helps us get to how everyone's truly doing. And that has really helped me realize that everyone's having their challenges, and it's been really humanizing and also helpful in building community.
Spoken like a true future psychiatry resident. Alice, speaking of relationships, what is your perspective on how relationships themselves can help with managing stress?
This is one of the most enduring findings of the literature in terms of benefit to our psychological health. So the quality of our relationships predicts positive outcomes for our health. Dozens of studies have shown that people with social support from family, friends, and their community are happier, have fewer health problems, and tend to live longer. And there are a couple different ways relationships help manage stress. So one example can be being in strong relationships can motivate us to live healthier through stress-reducing behaviors. Studies show social support is related to eating more vegetables, exercising, and also quitting smoking. On the level of stress hormones, experiencing care from someone else can relieve the harmful levels of stress in the moment, so kind of lower the amount of stress that we experience. And conversely, providing care, like volunteering and performing acts of kindness, can lower levels of cortisol. And when it comes to the actual interactions themselves, when we experience shared positive emotions in conversation, we're likely experiencing some parasympathetic activity. So as the rest and digest system in the body, parasympathetic activity promotes feelings of calmness, contentment, and relaxation. So overall, when we experience relationships with mutual care, shared positive emotions, and appreciation, we feel better about our lives and ourselves, which helps us to face different stressors we experience. And just a side note, remember the emotional validation tool that I mentioned earlier? It turns out this is a great skill for enhancing connection when we practice it with ourselves and with other people. The reason is emotional validation shows we're listening and understanding someone, which are really essential building blocks for strengthening relationships.
And Sapna, to you, are there any resources or specific support services provided by the medical school that you found particularly helpful in managing stress?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with regards to the mind-body connection aspect of wellness, I have absolutely found the free fitness classes at the gym extremely helpful. And it's nice that it's an opportunity on afternoons or in the mornings on weekends to go in and do a yoga class or a bar or Pilates class for free. That has been so lovely as a grad student. Also, as part of the Student Success Center, the food pantry has been a huge resource on busy days and busy weeks where it's hard to go grocery shopping. Dropping in and seeing a bunch of produce is lovely. I think also the hospitals here and there have pretty cool resources. I know one day at the hospital a few months ago, there was a free massage for medical students, trainees, and faculty, which was really cool. With regards to some of the other resources that I've found really helpful, there is a learning specialist here at UCSF, and I met with her early in preclinical to talk about different learning strategies, particularly that other students have found helpful in med school. And so I've found that to be helpful, as well as the coaching program that we have at UCSF, where each of us is paired up with a coach along with some other medical students. And that has been a really nice community to talk about both the challenging things and the many accomplishments, both inside and outside of medical school. So I found that to be a really nice community as well.
That's awesome. I always like to repeat the sentiment of never worrying alone. And I think that with the resources that most medical schools, like UCSF, for example, have, one of the most important things you can do when you are feeling that stress is reach out. As you noted, many of us are these ducks with our little, what do ducks have? Do ducks have feet?
Paddles?
No, ducks, I don't know.
Whatever they're called, yeah.
Whatever they're called, they're using them. And I think that some of the most important things we can do is identify and acknowledge and seek help. Reflecting on this idea of seeking help and moving forward and being internally aware of your own experience, how do you think the skills that you're developing now in managing stress and emotional awareness will benefit you in your future medical career?
I think that's a great question. And it's something my coach, who's one of my amazing mentors here on campus, says a lot of. She always mentions that a lot of what we learn in medical school could be different by the end of our training, just because of how quickly medicine moves. But she mentions that a lot of what we do learn in training is, one, how to communicate with people, and two, how to really learn a lot of these techniques to manage stress. So I do find all of these skills really, really helpful moving forward, especially knowing that our roles and responsibilities will definitely change in the next several years. And we'll also hopefully have mentees and trainees who will also probably rely on us and lean on us to be an anchor. And so that's something I'm very aware of. And I think that being able to find different methods of managing stress and other challenges that come up really allows us to maintain ourselves in this career and also just be a good friend and person to our loved ones in our lives, and also just good clinicians. And so that's something that I hold really closely, particularly with mindfulness techniques and stress management skills that allow us to be more present. I find myself already using these to feel more centered in clinical care, and I can see this becoming more of the case as I have more responsibilities in the clinical space. And something else I think a lot about, especially at this point in my medical training, there's a lot of language about burnout and self-care. And I'm always remiss to not mention how a lot of these are framed in a way where it's the onus on the individual to practice self-care and find resilience and manage our own wellness and things like that. And so really this emphasis on community building and how can we as medical providers, medical trainees also help create a system that is more equipped to create community and to foster joy in the clinical workspace. And so I'm hoping that in cultivating these own strategies for myself, I become a resident and attending who is also a lot more understanding and who helps create a better medical training process for the generations to come. And I think that also practicing these self-care techniques allows us to advocate better for our patients and to find these holes in the systems that we work in and have the energy to advocate for system-level change for our patients, for other trainees. And I'm really grateful at UCSF I've been able to work with so many residents and attendings who I'm sure have dealt with these sort of stress management techniques and stressors in their own training and have now really helped pay it forward for trainees like myself to have a more seamless process. And there's always work to be done, but I'm also excited to be that change when I get to that level as well.
And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, that stress doesn't end in medical school. It just morphs into a different thing in residency. And the better you can set those habits earlier on, the better things will be in residency and beyond. What we've cut off for ourselves is tough. Medicine is not easy, and acknowledging that and trying to get that support is really, really important.
Absolutely.
Also, ducks have webs.
Webs.
I don't think they're not called webs. They're technically called palmate feet, which really doesn't make any sense, but they are webs, webbed feet.
Got it.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Alice and Sapna for sharing their thoughts with us today on managing stress and being aware of your emotions. I have one final question for each of them as we wind down. What might our listeners do to foster belonging for others at UCSF?
Well, in light of these micro skills I just shared, I feel compelled to say practicing skills like mindfulness helps us understand ourselves, which enhances the quality of our relationships, which in turn helps us to feel belonging and connection. And in addition to that sense of belonging, I just want to recognize that being part of and connected to a supportive community helps us feel more agency, shared purpose, and hope.
I think something my friend group and I try a lot to do is just so many dinner parties and events where we can just get together after a long week and just sit and talk about fun moments from our week, talk about our accomplishments from our week, our stressors. And that has just been such a lovely environment to just catch up with people in a very low effort, low stress environment. And so that's within my lovely, amazing friend group here at UCSF. But I think something else that I've been holding a lot of joy in is in the last 2 months, just finding classmates who maybe I didn't talk to as much in my preclinical year, but I see them on the shuttles, I see them around the hospital, and just getting to catch up with them, taking a second to stop them in the halls and just ask them how their week has been. And that has been such a lovely, unanticipated aspect of community now in my clinical year. And so just finding people and finding moments to check in has been really helpful. And also just sharing resources very openly. And that has been such a great way to get more connected with people as well. And in the preclinical stage, I feel like being inclusive, having as many social events as possible, joining interest groups and going to as many lunch talks as possible, and just finding ourselves in places that we usually wouldn't be, I think is a great way to really establish community and meet people that we probably wouldn't otherwise.
Very much so in line with my advice to folks within medical programs is just putting yourself out there as much as possible, even if it doesn't seem comfortable at first. You never know who you're going to meet. And I certainly have met some of my best friends in my entire life in those slapsticky medical student social events. And so certainly putting my motivation behind that is important. So in conclusion, today we have learned how perfectionistic tendencies are learned and reinforced, practicing mindfulness in your own way, benefiting from emotional awareness, and appreciating the impacts of relationship on managing stress. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Don't forget to tune in to other episodes in this series on medical student success.
Thank you for listening to The Bridge, and please look for more episodes in our series. The Bridge is brought to you by the UCSF Academy of Medical Educators Innovations for Funding in Education program. Our hosts are Alvin Glanga and Dr. Nakai Corral. Our production staff are Dr. Eric Hung and Valerie Jones. Our sound engineer is John Oliver. Our music is by Duke Q, Wax Roof, Mabanwa, and Les Imprimes, courtesy of Big Crown Records.